May the peace of Christ be with you. The topic today is The Malcontent by John Marston. This is a fascinating play full of interesting turns and twists. Marston's play trades on a type that was popular in high and low culture of the time, the malcontent. Think Hamlet as a classic example, the sort of man at odds with the world around him. Something of a crank. Groucho Marx would be an example from modern culture, or Bernard Black on Black's Books, if you've ever seen that. So we see a description of the malcontent type at Act 1, Scene 2, about line 19. Pietro says, "This Malvole is one of the most prodigious affectations that ever conversed with nature. A man, or rather a monster, more discontent than Lucifer when he was thrust out of the presence. His appetite is unsatiable as the grave, as far from any content as from heaven. His highest delight is to procure others vexation, and therein he thinks he truly serves heaven, for 'tis his position. Whosoever in this earth can be contented is a slave and damned. Therefore does he afflict all in that to which they are most affected. The elements struggle within him. His own soul is at variance with herself. His speech is halter-worthy at all hours. I like him, Faith. He gives good intelligence to my spirit, makes me understand those weaknesses which others' flattery palliates." Right, so a kind of figure of discontent, of critique of everyone and everything around him. That's what the malcontent is. In Act 3, Scene 2, about line 5, Malvole says, "The gallery slave, that all the toilsome day tugs at his oar against the stubborn wave, struggling his rugged veins, snores fast." Right? Sleeps well, in other words. "The stooping scytheman that doth barb the field, that makes wink sure, in night all creatures sleep. Only the malcontent, that's 'gainst his fate, repines and quarrels, alas. He's Goodman Tell-clock." In other words, he's awake to see what time it is. "His sallow jawbones sink with wasting moan, while others' beds are down, his pillows stone." Right? So the malcontent can't rest because he sees the evil and stupidity of the world, while those who are indifferent or clueless rest well. Right? This is what the malcontent, as Malvole, is suggesting. Alto fronto disguised as Malvole. Which brings us to the plot. All right, the plot of the play being fairly basic. Right, we have a usurped lord who is going to reclaim his place through this sort of act of disguise. The play has two important contexts, two important sort of bits of background we need to understand. One is what we sometimes call the rival traditions. That is the private theater in Shakespeare's age versus the public theater. The private theater was more expensive to attend, was performed largely indoors, and interestingly was generally performed by boys, boy actors. Whereas the public theater was less expensive, sort of more, we might say, democratic, all kinds of people attended it. The adults was acted by adult males, outside during the day. Right? And there was a real kind of rivalry between the public theaters and the private theaters, the private acting companies and the public acting companies. And The Malcontent was a play first performed by a boys' company, Blackfriars, and was then sort of taken over under questionable circumstances by the King's Men, Shakespeare's company, at the Globe. And this is alluded to, this background is alluded to in a section clearly added after this appropriation of the play by the King's Men. Very early in the play, in the induction. In the Blackwell anthology, this is on page 421. But you have these characters, Condell, Sly, Burbage. These are the actual names of the actors. Will Sly and Henry Condell and Richard Burbage were actors in the King's Men in Shakespeare's company. And Burbage actually played the role of Altofronto / Malvolio. But on page 421, in the induction, about line 90, Condell says, "Faith, sir, the book was lost, and because 'twas pity so good a play should be lost, we found it and played it." Right? He's sort of suggesting that they stole the play from Blackfriars. And there's a lot of this kind of thing going on in the age, because there's not such clear-cut kind of copyright and performance right in the time. Sly says, "I wonder you would play it, another company having interest in it." Condell, "Why not Malevole in folio with us, as Hieronymo in deso sexto with them?" So he's suggesting that they're stealing the Malcontent from Blackfriars because Blackfriars stole the Spanish tragedy from them. Right? So he says, "They taught us a name for our play. We call it One for Another," right? A kind of revenge. Sly says, "What are your additions, right? What have you added?" Burbage speaks up and says, "Sooth, not greatly needful, only as your salad to your great feast, to entertain a little more time, and to abridge the not received custom of music in our theater. I must leave you, sir." Right? So they're talking about this borrowing of the play. And so we see enacted in the induction some kind of reference to the rival theaters of the time. And Marston, John Marston, was part of this, very much part of this wild world of early modern theater. He was a notorious satirist, known for his biting wit. He had feuds with Ben Jonson and with others. And amusingly, he ends up at later in his career a country person, right? A minister in a country parish, right? Not an end that anyone would have predicted for Marston. So the social world of early modern theater is itself a part of the background of the play, and that in some ways sort of gestures toward an association between the Malcontent and Marston himself as a sort of Malcontent figure. The other important context for the Malcontent is the ascension of James I, the death of Elizabeth, and the ascension of James Stuart, James I of England, James VII of Scotland. You can see perhaps in the play a kind of cynical view of court life emerge. If we look at the very beginning of the play, Act 1, Scene 1, instantly it seems like the court is attacked. So we start with the vilest out-of-tune music being heard, and in comes Bilioso and Prepasso. Bilioso says, "Why, how now? Are ye mad or drunk or both or what?" Prepasso, "Are ye building Babylon there?" Bilioso, "Here's a noise in court. You think you're in a tavern, do you not?" You think you're in a brothel house, do you not? This room is ill-centered. Right? Someone is making a tavern and a brothel house out of the court, and you know, these are in fact perhaps the sort of thing some people had to say about James's court in comparison to the court of Elizabeth. Enter one with a perfume, right? He's trying to cover up the stink. So perfume, some upon me, I pray thee. The Duke is upon instant entrance, so make place there. Right? And so the perfume here is suggesting a kind of cover-up, that there's something stinking in the court, in court life, and it is only perfumed, it is only covered up. One important character then for this is Mendoza, who emerges as a kind of epitome of court corruption. In Act 1, Scene 5, line 21, Mendoza speaks, and you see how he is sort of the figure of court corruption in the play. He says, "Now, good Elysium, what a delicious heaven it is for a man to be in a prince's favor. O sweet God, O pleasure, O fortune, O all thou best of life, what should I think, what say, what do, to be a favorite, a minion," right? To be a hanger-on at court. To have a general timorous respect, observe a man, a stateful silence in his presence, solitariness in his absence, a confused hum, and a busy murmur of obsequious suitors training him, the cloth held up and way proclaimed before him, petitionary vassals licking the pavement with their slavish knees, while some odd palish lampreys that engender with snakes are full of eyes on both sides, with a kind of insinuated humbleness, fix all their delights upon his brow. He's saying, oh, to be a favorite at court, to be a hanger-on of the prince, so that everyone has to kiss up to me, is essentially what he's saying. Oh, blessed state, with a ravishing prospect doth the Olympus of favor yield. Death, a cornute the Duke, sweet women, most sweet ladies, nay, angels, by heaven, he is more accursed than a devil that hates you, or is hated by you, and happier than a god that loves you, or is beloved by you. You preservers of mankind, lifeblood of society, who would live, nay, who can live without you? O paradise, how majestical is your austere presence, how imperiously chaste is your more modest face, but oh, how full of ravishing attraction is your pretty, petulant, languishing, lasciviously composed countenance. These amorous smiles, those soul-warming, sparkling glances, ardent as those flames that singe the world by heedless Phaeton. In body how delicate, in soul how witty, in discourse how pregnant, in life how wary, in favors how judicious, in day how sociable, and in night how, oh, pleasure unutterable. Right, so a kind of view of court as this corrupt place full of hypocrisy and lust and just general human ugliness, right? Ugliness and sin. So Mendoza is a sort of court Machiavel, right? A character without scruples or ideals or principles. And the suggestion seems to be that court life attracts these unscrupulous types, right? Like Lorenzo in the Spanish tragedy. For instance, in Act 1, Scene 7, Act 1, Scene 7, about line 42, actually about line 87 in Act 1, Scene 7. Mendoza says, "Who cannot feign friendship can ne'er produce the effects of hatred. Honest fool, duke, subtle, lascivious duchess, silly novice, forens, I do laugh at ye. My brain is in labor till it produce mischief. My brain is in labor till it produce mischief. He's just driven to do bad things. And I feel sudden throes, proof sensible, the issue is at hand. As bear-shaped young, so I'll form my device, which grown proves horrid. Vengeance makes men wise. And so Mendoza, this sort of figure of court corruption and evil, right, bent on destroying for his own gain and for his own pleasure. He seems to take a kind of sick pleasure in it. At the end of scene 1, act 2, he says, fortune still dotes on those who cannot blush. Right? In other words, he's saying those who have no shame seize opportunity and rise in life. So this kind of ruthlessness that typifies the sort of person who thrives at court. That's Mendoza is a clear example of that in the play. Bilioso is another example of that. We see that come out more a little later in the play. This is what is this? This is Act 4. Act 4, Scene 5. Act 4, Scene 5, about line 103. Bilioso says, why then I would turn straight again, 'tis good run still with him that has most might. I had rather stand with wrong than fall with right. Right? That sort of Machiavellian attitude, no scruples, no ideals, no morals. Malvolio says, what religion will you be of now? Like, where's your religious principles? Bilioso, of the Duke's religion, when I know what it is, right? Whatever religion the Duke is, whatever the Duke says, Bilioso says, I'm going to do, because that's how you rise in the world. That's how you get on in the world. So Marston depicts a court in which the moral order is well, not really just inverted, but just kind of absolved. A world of the court in Marston's eyes seems to be a world of amorality, just whatever works, do it. Right? And it's hard, again, not to see this coming at the time of the Ascension as a reflection on the court of James. And some lines in the play seem to gesture sort of more directly toward that. For instance, Act 1, Scene 2. Act 1, Scene 2, at about line 4, Malvolio calls out of his chamber, "Yah, God's a man, what dost thou there? Duke's Ganymede." And Ganymede being the cupbearer of Jove, but also being slang in the period for a boy prostitute. So Duke's Ganymede, Juno's jealous of thy long stocking, shadow of a woman. What wouldst weasel? Shadow of a woman, right? A man, an effeminate man, in other words. Thou lamb o' court, we notice. What dost thou bleat for? Ah, you smooth-chinned catamite. Right? Catamite is another word for a boy prostitute. And so it's possible to see this as a glance at James I rumored homosexuality. And Marston is perhaps suggesting this is part of the corruption of the court. So just a plethora of characters gesturing toward this corruption. You have also Ferenz and Marquel in Act 1, Scene 6, about line well, at the very beginning of Act 1, Scene 6. So line 1, Aurelia says, and is it possible? Mendoza slight me? Possible? And Ferin says, possible. What can be strange in him that's drunk with favor, grows insolent with grace? Speak, Marquel, speak. Marquel says aside to Ferenz, to speak feelingly, more richly in solid sense than worthless words. Give me those jewels of your ears to receive my enforced duty. So, Marquel is asking Ferenz for a bribe in order to have access to Aurelia. Right? As for my part, 'tis well known I can put up anything. Ferenz privately feeds Marquel's hands with jewels during this speech. So we see this bribery going on throughout the speech. Can bear patiently with any man, but when I heard he wronged your precious sweetness, I was enforced to take deep offense. 'Tis most certain he loves Amelia with high appetite, and as she told me, as you know, we women impart our secrets one to another, when she repulsed his suit in that he was possessed with your endeared grace, Mendoza most ungratefully renounced all faith to you. Right? So Marquel is all the while being bribed while she says these things, right? And so there's this hypocrisy going on in the court, right? Marquel should be loyal to her lady, but she is not, and accepts these bribes willingly. In this sort of ugly quid pro quo of court. Right? And so this is a harsh view of court life that emerges in the play. Another example of that would be in Act 3, Scene 2. Malevole says, at the palace, this is at line 25, Act 3, Scene 2, line 25. At the palace, now discretion, shield man, for God's love, let's have no more cuckolds. Hymen begins to put off his saffron robe. Keep thy wife in the state of grace. Heart of truth, I would sooner leave my lady singled in a bordello than in the Genoa palace, sin there appearing in her sluttish shape. He says, I'd rather leave my lady in a whorehouse than in the palace. There's a view of the palace as the court as a place of sin, and that's why, of course, the play is set in Genoa, right? But there's a kind of joke in that because the actual Genoa is a republic. Right? And this may be Marston's way of signaling we're not really talking about Italy here at all. We're talking about England. In Act 3, Scene 3, line 64, Malvolio says, while sure my blood gives me, I am a noble. Sure I am of noble kind, for I find myself possessed with all their qualities. Love dogs, dice, and drabs, right? That's prostitutes, right? Gambling prostitutes. Scorn wit in stuffed clothes, have beat my shoemaker, knocked my seamstress, cuckolded my apothecary, that's his pharmacist, and undone my tailor. Noble? Why not? Right? So that's a harsh view of the nobility and of the court in general. Of course, the court isn't the only target for the satire, or really what we might call invective, right? Harsh criticism of the play. The church also kind of gets harshly critiqued in the Malcontent. So Act 1, Scene 3, about line 5, Malvolio says, from the public place of much dissimulation, the church. Pietro says, what didst there? Malvolio, talk with a usurer, take up at interest. I wonder what religion thou art of a soldier's religion. And what dost thou think makes more infidels now? Sex I have seeming piety change her robe so oft that sure none but some archdevil can shape her a new petticoat. Right, so a kind of critique of the church and church hypocrisy. Right, you go to the church and you find there usurers. You find the church politically involved. Right, all this kind of criticism of a corrupted church that Marston will end up actually part of, interestingly. Page 451 in the anthology. This is Act 4, Scene 3, about line 101. Mendoza says, Hermit, thou art a man for me, my confessor. O thou selected spirit, born for my good, see thou wouldst make an excellent elder in a deformed church. Come, right? So he's talking about the fake hermit, right? But here he said he uses an interesting rubric, deformed church, a kind of pun on the Reformed church of the Protestant Reformation to suggest a kind of corruption. So the church is a secondary target in the play. There's also a lot of misogynist jokes in the play. Right? So you could almost say that women are a target in Marston's play, with all this sort of jokes about the nature of women. I think it's possible that the misogyny in the play is part of a general misanthropy, right? So it's not just women, but the wickedness of women is used by Marston as a sort of example of the wickedness of people in general. Right, so for instance, Act 5, Scene 3, about line 36, Malvolio says, Now the fear of the devil forever go with thee. Marquel, I tell thee, I have found an honest woman. Right, of course we know Marquel's not an honest woman. Faith, I perceive when all is done, there is of women, as of all things, some good, most bad, some saints, some sinners. For as nowadays no courtier but has his mistress, no captain but his cockatrice, no cuckold but has his horns, and no fool but has his feather. Even so, no woman but has her weakness, and feather too. No sex but has his, I can hunt the letter no further. Oh God, how loathsome this toying is to me, that a duke should be forced to fool it. Well, stultorum plena sunt omnia, right? The quotation from the Vulgate, the number of the stupid is infinite. Better play the fool, Lord, than be the fool, Lord. Now, where's your slights, Madame Marquel, right? So he's sort of obviously fooling Marquel here, but he does interestingly say there's women, as of all other things, some good, most bad, some saints, some sinners, right? Which would suggest that the misogyny of the play is part of a general misanthropy, general sort of look at the wickedness of human beings in general. So like in Hamlet, certainly like in the Spanish tragedy, there seems to be a kind of pessimistic view of a depraved, sin-cursed world. And we see this in the actions of the characters, right, who act from depraved motives and do depraved things. For instance, the plot that Aurelia and Mendoza hatch to murder her husband. Right? Act 2, Scene 5, about line 83, Aurelia says, Shall we murder him? Mendoza, instantly? Aurelia, instantly, before he casts a plot, or further blaze my honor's much-known blot. Let's murder him. I would do much for you. Will you marry me? I'll make thee duke. We are of Medicis, right? The Medicis, these infamously ruthless rulers of Florence in Italy. right? So we see, they just turn so instantly to murder. Let's murder the Duke and rid ourselves of this problem. So we see adultery, we see murder, just kind of quickly and easily embraced in the play. Mendoza says in Act 2, Scene 3, about line 53, it makes man blushless, that is shameless, and man is, all confess, more prone to vengeance than to gratefulness. Favors are writ in dust, but stripes we feel. Depraved nature stamps in lasting steel. So Mendoza is not, of course, condemning this. He's sort of owning it, but he's gesturing toward that Calvinist idea of total depravity, of the just utter sinfulness of man. And this becomes a thematic focus for the play. An example of how that's focused on in the play would be Act 4, Scene 4. Pietro says, all is damnation, wickedness extreme. There is no faith in man. Right? The actions of the play would seem to bear that out. Would seem to suggest that is true. Malvolé, and none but usurers and brokers, they deceive no man. Right? So they're openly wicked. Men take them for bloodsuckers, and so they are. Now God deliver me from my friends. Thy friends? Yes, from my friends, for from mine enemies I'll deliver myself. Oh, cutthroat friendship is the rankest villainy. Mark this Mendoza, mark him for a villain. Right? Mark this Mendoza for a villain. But heaven will send a plague upon him for a rogue. Pietro, O world. Right? So this sort of view of a sin-cursed world. Malvolé, world, 'tis the only region of death, the greatest shop of the devil, the cruelest prison of men, one out of which none pass without paying their dearest breath for a fee. There's nothing perfect in it but extreme, extreme calamity, such as comes yonder. And then Aurelia enters. There's this view of the world as wicked and depraved and full of people just easily and instantly embracing sin at every possibility. And that's one reason why the play is full of such filthy jokes. So given all of that, again, it seems like the world of the Malcontent is very similar to the world of the Spanish tragedy. But there's one very, very important difference. It would seem as if in kids' play, in the Spanish tragedy, it would seem as if no redemption is possible. But in Marston's play, in fact, we find there is redemption. There does seem to be a possibility of redemption. If we look at Act 4, Scene 5, Act 4, Scene 5, we seem to see a contrite Aurelia who is seeking redemption. Aurelia says, why? I can desire nothing but death. This is line 5 in Act 4, Scene 5. I can desire nothing but death, nor deserve anything but hell. Right? Well, knowing you deserve nothing but hell is contrition, is the first step toward redemption. If heaven should give sufficiency of grace to clear my soul, it would make heaven graceless. My sins would make the stock of mercy poor. Oh, they would try heaven's goodness to reclaim them. Judgment is just, yet from the vast villain, but sure he shall not miss sad punishment, for he shall rule. Oh, to my cell of shame. A little further down, around line 26, she says, oh, let the anguish of my contrite spirit entreat some reconciliation. If not, O joy, triumph in my just grief. Right? She says, I'm contrite. Let there be some redemption. If not, I deserve what I get. Right? And so it's almost as if there's in Kid, you see them sort of picking up on the one half of the Calvinist picture, total depravity, right? But missing the grace half of it, right? But Marston seems to pick up on both sides of Reformed theology and say, yes, man is totally sinful. Look how wicked human beings are. Look what we do without second thought. But there's a possibility of redemption. Right? We see Pietro, right, is another example of redemption in the play. This is, what is this? This is Act 4, scene 5. Act 4, scene 5. Pietro says at line 142, I here renounce forever regency. O Altofronto, I wrong thee to supplant thy right. Right. So Duke Pietro realizes he's usurped Altofronto's place. He repents of his political maneuvering. O Altofronto, I wrong thee to supplant thy right, to trip thy heels up with the devilish sleight, for which I now from throne am thrown. World tricks abjure. For vengeance, though come slow, yet it comes sure. Right? So, in other words, justice is inevitably done, he says. Very different from the world of the Spanish tragedy. Oh, I am changed, for here, for the dread power, in true condition, I do dedicate my breath to solitary holiness, my lips to prayer, and my breast care shall be restoring Altofronto to regency. And so he's contrite. He says later on in the scene, about line 159, pardon and love, give leave to recollect my thoughts dispersed in wild astonishment. My vows stand fixed in heaven, and from hence I crave all love and pardon. So he seems to be reformed, as does Ferenz, right? Who's still kind of a rascal at the end, but maybe a penitent rascal. Right, in that same scene, he says about line 157, right, when Pietro says, doth Ferenz live? Right, he thought he was dead. And Ferenz says, for your pardon. Right, and so all these characters sort of turning for redemption at the end. Of course, not everybody in the play is redeemed. Some are beyond redemption, it would seem. But there is redemption in this world that Marston imagines, unlike the world of the Spanish tragedy. So we get this ending picture of forgiveness, kind of beautiful scene of forgiveness in Act 5, Scene 6, between Aurelia and Pietro, right? Aurelia says, "Oh, yet forbear my hand, away, fly, fly. Oh, seek not her that seeks to die." Right? So Aurelia, is sort of saying, to Pietro, I've betrayed you, I've plotted your murder, right? You should reject me. But Pietro replies, poor loved soul. And Aurelia says, what, wouldst court misery? And Pietro says, yes, right? Yes. And that yes, coming from Pietro, who had been, a villain, not the play's worst villain, but a villain, nonetheless, that yes is strikingly Christ-like. It's in a willingness to attach himself to a flawed human being. I mean, Aurelia has betrayed him about as much as a person can betray a spouse. But he says, yes, I will court misery, right? To love another flawed and forgive another flawed human being is to court misery. We can expect betrayal and sin from other human beings, but nevertheless, we can also love them. Marston seems to suggest, and in this world in which redemption is possible. So there is in the malcontent real suffering and pain, but also redemption, and this makes the play a tragicomedy. And in some ways, I think it's possible to argue that the tragicomedy, the combination of tragedy and comedy, is the most Christian of modes. That pure tragedy, in its sort of pitilessness, misses redemption. Pure comedy misses the tragic element in life, in the fall and in fallenness. But when you combine the two, I think you get a much more sort of full Christian view of the world. I think you see this most clearly perhaps in Shakespeare's The Winter's Tale, his great tragicomedy. And you have then, it makes sense that you have this sort of symbolic resurrections, right, of Firenze, who is believed dead, but really of Altofronto / Malevole himself, right? And this kind of new life that they're symbolically born to at the end, and then this sort of theatrical ending, the ending with the play, suggesting that theater itself is a kind of ritual that Marston here is suggesting could be a ritual of healing. So an interesting play, because it begins with contention, right? Even before the plot starts, it begins with the contention between the Blackfriars and the King's Men, this kind of battle of wills, battle of aims and ambitions. But it ends in reconciliation. It begins in contention and it ends in reconciliation. And so the malcontent turns out to be a deeply Christian portrayal of reality.